What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another brand new episode of the Motivate, Grind, Succeed podcast. You see who we have today. We have David Edwards on the show, and it is an absolute pleasure to have him on the show. So, David Edwards, if you all don't know who he is, he worked his way through school, eventually achieving his bachelor's in business and his MBA in healthcare administration. He has served mostly lower income people on 3 continents over the last 35 years and is familiar with the challenges and the unfairness in life. In 2018, while working with doctors and dentists and counselors and community health workers, he had an epiphany. The core challenge most people have is to generate the personal drive to direct their own life, enduring principles to guide, and the most current science-based tools to assist them through a bumpy and a messy life. His first book, called New You, Who Knew, is an attempt to put in writing an easy to digest guide to implement that you can use to implement, confidence, esteem, and self-compassion in balance in your life. Sounds absolutely fantastic. And David, I am so glad to have you on the show. Welcome. How are you doing today?
I'm really good, thank you. It's wonderful to be here, and I appreciate the energy and the time and the effort that it goes into, pulling these things together and finding guests, and you're really striving. I can tell from, your history that you really strive to make a difference, and I love this no fluff zone.
Thank you. We really try to push that as like our fluff-free guarantee that we try to give practical tips and takeaways with every single episode. That way people can leave each and every episode knowing, hey, here is at least one thing that I can implement to help better my life. So thank you for
Excellent.
coming on the show. And it's awesome that you're here. And so even though I gave a little introduction, as people who listen to the show usually know, whenever we have guests, we like to let them do most of the talking. So if you could go ahead and give us your story, like your backstory from like little Edward from little David, up until now. Like what is your story and how did you start doing what you do?
Well, I won't go back to the beginning. As you noted, I've worked for 35 years, and people get a little bored, going back to 1983 when I started at a community health center in Seattle, Washington, working part time while I was going to college, and trying to make enough money to pay for tuition. And but from there, I felt very blessed in my career. And maybe something that's important. I worked in that first job for 6 years, and the organization was growing rapidly, which I really enjoyed. And I left there, starting part time as an accounting clerk. I did accounts payable for them. Excuse me. And then when I left, 6 years later, we were 3 times the size, and I was the director of finance, kind of like a CFO in a nonprofit.
Gotcha.
And I left, and I won't go into all that backstory, but and I thought, this has been fun. I enjoyed this, right? I was young, and I went to work for the cable company. Nothing wrong with cable, right? We like having cable.
Yep.
It's how I get my internet. And but what I found was I worked hard like I had before, but I didn't, my personal values, which I'd never really thought that much about. Even I felt like I had values, but I was so uncomfortable there. And, for me, and this is just my story, this is not your story or any of your listeners, because we all have our own story. And whatever our story is, that's the most important story, right? So right. I'm a sidelight. I'm a, for interest or something, but I don't want to say this is where anybody else should be or feel or do or anything like that. So, but in my own story, I had so loved working for this organization for those 6 years that I took it for granted. And I didn't have a lot of other experience to kind of compare it to. And so when I went to this other job, I found that I didn't want to put the time in. I didn't really feel like, so what? For me, it was like, it's just for money. And I knew it was a problem when the CEO of this division, it was a $500 million division of a multi-billion dollar company.
Wow.
Um, and uh, and we had a good year, evidently. And so a consultant who was a former like U.S. senator under a retainer with the company, and the CEO of this division bought matching green Jaguars, convertibles, I think. And I thought, that's fine, but I didn't get a bonus. I
Mhm.
didn't get anything. I just work hard. And I don't think I. So, anyways, as part of when you're younger, it's really smart to kind of think about stuff and say what resonates with me and what doesn't. Is this a
Mhm.
kind of a place that I want to work at, that I want to put the time into, and the rewards that they offer, the kind of things that I'm really interested in? And and so that was really some of my first early experiences with what values are and how important values are. Anyways, I went through my career. I worked at a number of other organizations, wonderful places. I found, and as I say that, there was nothing wrong with this company. It was well run. They were very successful. It just wasn't my thing.
Mm.
And I didn't realize that when I went there, it was a job that paid reasonably well, and that's kind of all I was looking for. So, um, you know, I guess. Anyways, so I go on forward. I worked in Africa for a while, in Nigeria. I commissioned a hospital over there, which was a fascinating project.
Mm.
We've had more supply chain issues in the United States, right, than any time in my lifetime, at least in the last couple of years. But in Nigeria, this would be nothing. you know, and that was 15 years ago, but or let me see, 2005. So um, 17 years ago. But it's you know, I counted. I was there. My first kind of stint was like 3 months, and I had public power for 20 minutes
Mm.
in 3 months. And so, the scale of challenges, what just off the charts different. But it was a fascinating experience, and I fell in love with the people there. And I still have, well, you can't see it, but over here I have some artwork and different things. I still have friends over there. But anyways, so back in the U.S., I wanted to work with tribal health.
Mhm.
So I'd done cardiology, I'd done elder care, I'd done primary care, and so I really wanted to get some experience working with Native American populations. And I'd, been working with populations in Nigeria, mostly Yoruba people, and I really wanted that additional experience and exposure. And so I was able to go to Alaska and work with a tribal health consortium. And these were 14, I think it was 12 or 14 tribal governments, so, legally recognized tribes who had a healthcare authority, but, some of these tribes were really small. And so they banded these together, combined them, and created this not for profit consortium to kind of provide health services to this region, which is the size of Florida.
Wow, that's pretty big.
It's a big area with only 80,000 people in it.
Wow.
So you're in Chicago, right?
Yeah.
So you could go a mile in any direction. You've probably got 80,000 people within your circle.
Yeah.
And so this was a big circle with lots of glaciers and mountains and islands and grizzly bears and all that kind of stuff. All the things Alaska is famous for. Um, but I loved working there. And it was where I knew that I wanted to work in integrated care, because if you think about it, Rashawn, when you were born, was your head attached to your body?
It was. I mean, I would hope so.
Yeah. And your mouth, right? Your mouth is a part of
Yeah.
the body. You don't really distinguish, it's all connected in there, right?
Mhm.
And so I had realized after all these various experiences, though, is that the American, or not really American, it's the whole Western, what we call allopathic medical system, is
Mm.
designed around a reductionist model. right?
Hmm.
And so
Okay.
you go to a dentist to look at your teeth. And there's a lot of advantages to this, right? Because your dentist knows a lot more than your cardiologist about your
Hmm.
teeth.
Right.
And
Yeah.
the cardiologist knows a lot about their heart, right? And et cetera, et cetera. And we've gone to this extreme level of kind of reductionist because within cardiology, I worked in cardiology for 11 years. You have cardiologists that are non-invasive and then invasive, and then you've got a nuclear medicine specialist, and then you've got electrophysiology specialists, and so on and so forth. And so, we have a lot of benefits that have accrued to us from that. But the downside is we have forgotten that we come as a whole package. And, anyways, and so I wanted to work and have this experience with an organization that looks at a whole person. And in tribal health, they look at you as a whole person. We had dentists, we had behavioral health, mental health counselors, we had primary care, we had a hospital, so we had surgeons, and we had optometry, we had a sweat lodge,
You
right?
got everything.
We had everything, right? And so, the sweat lodge was right behind the behavioral health place and below the dental office. And
Hmm.
and and so, but what I liked about that was they tried to look at you as a whole person. And they
Mm.
realized that other partners on the team might have an expertise in eyes or hearts or whatever, but you are a whole person, and that's how we want to see you. And I love that, including their cultural and their spiritual side, right? Because those are all part of
Mm-hmm.
us. We can't really bifurcate those and separate them and have them exist independently because it's all connected. Does that make sense?
Hmm. Yep, that makes sense.
So I'm getting on a little bit of a soapbox here, but
Yeah, that's
so
fine. That's fine.
when I left the, no, go ahead.
No, I said that's okay. Like I said, we let the guests talk, so this is your time to have your soapbox. So yeah, go right on ahead.
So we moved back down to the lower 48 because yes, Alaska is a part of the United States, just in case anybody's wondering. It was kind of a running joke up there. Yes, we are a part of the United States, I promise. Just because Canada's in the way, but we are. Um, anyway, so we moved back down to Oregon, and I was really privileged to have an opportunity to work with a county-run, federally qualified health center. So I mentioned I started at a health center in Seattle, a federally qualified health center, which today is a large organization. I still talk to them every now and again. I mean, when I was there, we had 300 maybe staff, and
Hmm.
now they have like 2,000.
Wow, that's
50 locations, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They've continued to grow and do good things. But I was privileged to go to Oregon, and this was a time when there was a lot of healthcare reform going on in Oregon specifically. And they were moving to what they call a Cco model for Medicaid.
hmm.
And this is a coordinated care organization. And the idea is that if we look at this, try to look at this as a system instead of all these independent, completely separate parts, where cardiology doesn't know what's going on with primary care, doesn't know what's going on with behavioral care, what's going on
Hmm.
with, et cetera, et cetera. And so I was really fortunate to get there right at the beginnings, when they kind of passed the legislation, and I was able to be on some teams that were creating these CCOs as a way to improve health, increase coordination, manage the growth and costs, which has been a huge problem in healthcare in the United States in particular, running,
Hmm.
roughly twice of consumer price index for my lifetime, for a long time. So, um, and and again, we had this idea of if we can create integrated care around whole people, we're going to be more successful. We're going to do a better job. So, and eventually, I left there and I went to another place in a rural community in Oregon, and had the opportunity to design a new community health center from scratch, a brand new building. And I like creating things. I love creativity and growth, and so I was really excited about this opportunity. And And I thought to myself, if we just build another site like, anybody else would build, we were going to spend, I think, $16 million or something on this. We had better do this the best we possibly can. I mean, why bother if you're not going to push the bar, right? We're going to kind of open the envelope a little bit more and really think about this. And so we were very committed to this whole person idea of healthcare and health services. And so we wanted to design a physical plant that both created a relaxing, supportive atmosphere through physical design, as well as increase coordination and opportunities for collaboration, more touch points between team members and those kinds of things. So we really did a lot of research and some fun things like biophilic design. Any designers out there, architects? And what I was shocked, even smart, really good, capable architects had never heard of, or I've heard the word, but I don't really know what it is, right? We really tried to kind of move beyond those inertia, if you will. And then we had great team members. We wanted to kind of expand the team members. So we were really careful about the kind of people we hired, what their personal goals and values were, their interests, the kind of practice they wanted to develop, and on and on and on. So, we had people, facility, technology, all the normal things you think about. And at the time, I was studying change models. So our life, if we think about it, is all about change. For one thing, if we want to grow, evolve, develop, there's change required, right?
Right.
Who's the famous quote, trying to get different results with the same things is, a fool's errand. And so change is necessary. Beyond that, though, the world is changing. Technology is changing, right? I got really good in 1987 at programming my VCR. Anybody remember what a VCR is?
I've definitely seen one, but I haven't had to use it much, but I have seen one.
Well, of course not, because in 1987, though, this was super relevant. And you were genius status. Your IQ was way up there, 140 or something. If you could record set your VCR up to record your favorite program at 2:00 or 5:00 on Tuesday, so you could watch it when you got home from work, right? Whatever you're into, the football game or whatever. And so that was really relevant and important. But today, you don't even know what a VCR is because nobody has one and nobody cares. And so if you don't keep up with that, right, you got to learn how to use the DVD player. And we still have those, but not so much, right? Costco doesn't have a big DVD section anymore. It is gone because you stream everything, right? So now we got to learn how to stream, right? Anyway, so we got to keep up with the changing world or we become irrelevant. And I don't think any of us really wants to be irrelevant, right? We want to remain relevant. We want to remain viable, engaged, and frankly, enjoying the things that we have available in life. So it's all about change. And so that's what I was studying. And there's a bunch of different behavioral change models, and I won't get into all those, but and I had this epiphany. So this is my wow moment in 2018. We had pretty much designed and we were starting to build this facility. We were looking for staffing and all that kind of good stuff. But I realized that if we do all these other things perfectly, since our practice model was to say that you, Rashawn, are the patient, that you then are the captain of your healthcare team. You may have a physician, you may have a dentist, you may have a therapist, you may have a behavioral health consultant, you may have a coach, a health worker, a nurse, et cetera, right? You may have all these things that we had available, or you may only have one of those, right? Because it's totally dependent upon what your needs are. And our goal was to flex what you need when you need it. But you are the captain. You're in charge. And if you're not capable of fulfilling that role, I realized that our model, with all this effort and attention and expense we were putting into it, would be nominally more effective. And I'm not interested in being nominally more effective.
Right.
And none of us were, right? We wanted to be dramatically more effective. And I'm really proud to say we talk a lot about equity and inequity in the world today. This group of people, first one I've ever heard of, because we specifically set a goal to do it, and we had the capability to measure it and to prove, to kind of see progress or lack of progress. We set a goal to eliminate any disparities in health outcomes between
Mm.
our dominant subpopulation, which was a Hispanic, a lot of farm workers. It was an agricultural area. And so we identified that population and we said they should have the same or better clinical outcomes of our dominant, which was mostly a Caucasian population. And we worked on it for a few years. And before I left, we actually achieved. We could demonstrate over 2 quarters running that there was no disparity in health outcomes between those populations. Zero, none whatsoever.
Wow. That's impressive stuff.
That is impressive. And if I was back in Nigeria and I was trying to do the same thing, I would have said my dominant population was a Black African population, mostly Yoruba. Then we
Mm-hmm.
had subpopulations, a handful of white people, Caucasians, a handful of Lebanese people, a handful of, what was the other group we had there that was, now I've lost my memory. But anyways, I would have then said, well, what are their clinical outcomes compared to the dominant group? And how do we take steps, right, to specifically eliminate any disparity? So everybody's getting a similar level of care and having similar outcomes. So I began this journey. Now, about 6 months later, for lots of other reasons, I was fired.
Oh, no.
And as I don't know if you've ever been fired, but getting fired sucks.
Mm.
And I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't steal from the company, nothing like that. I had a disagreement with my board of directors, and I made some mistakes, I think, how I managed that. So I learned from it. That's the good thing. And as I licked my wounds, and we really thought, I got some time now. What am I going to do with it, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
dove deep in studying this idea about change. And one of the things I learned, just a little tidbit, is if you've ever been fired, it's very personal because you're the one who got fired.
Right.
But in the United States alone, let alone in the world, in the United States alone, 50,000 people are fired every day.
Wow.
In a
That
normal
that I did
year,
not know.
50,000 people. So if you got fired, it's not like you're the only person in the world today that got fired. There are 49,999 others who are in the same boat. And I'll talk about this in a little bit more, kind of lessons learned, right? But
Mm-hmm.
um, so I started to research and I really focused on it. And rather than like just finding another job, I started to feel like this was super important. There was something here that could make a real difference. And I realized in this research is that at the core of every single evidence-based change model is this idea of personal motivation. So let me ask you, Rashawn, sorry.
That's fine. That's fine.
Rashawn, what do you think of when I say the word motivation?
When I hear motivation, I think about something that is intrinsic, right? Like I believe that when it comes to motivation, that it can come either externally or internally. But I believe the more important one is for it to be an internal source of it. And since I keep using the word motivation, uh, my definition then of the word motivation would then be some kind of driving force that you use that pretty much sparks a fire, proverbially speaking, inside of you that causes you to take action.
Excellent. I love that. Thank you. That's a beautiful definition. I really like it. Um, and so as we think about motivation, and I've read a lot of business books. I've read a lot of personal development books and spiritual development books, and I've I like to read, so I've read a lot of things over my lifetime. And a lot of it, and especially a lot of the business-oriented books, right? My wife says, you read weird stuff, right? So, like I
Uh,
just read weird stuff, but I mean, it's about being more effective, being more successful, in one way or another. I was on a podcast recently, and she talked about wealth, right? And she said
mhm.
wealth could be money, but wealth could be your health. It could be your spirituality. Wealth can be a lot of things.
It
And
can,
so I
yes.
love that. What's that?
I would say they can, yes, because a lot of people they kind of contribute rich and wealth as the same thing, and to me, they're not the same thing. Rich
Exactly.
is more in terms of like monetary, but wealth can be in terms of all the things that you were just speaking about.
Exactly. And I love these kind of broader definitions because, again, it kind of come back to this idea so that people understand where I'm coming from, this framework of I'm a whole person, right? And
Hmm.
I have different domains in my life, but I am whole. And we try to put these facades on in a prior podcast you had with, I think it was Eric Winter, is it?
Hmm. Yep.
You guys talked about the facades and the masks that we put on and why people are always trying to please other people and that kind of stuff, and I'd love to address that in a minute, but anyways, so we think about these things, and so I started to understand motivation not from that kind of business perspective, because business is mostly interested in having us be more productive. They're interested in their business goals and they want me to be motivated to pursue those business goals. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that just makes perfect sense. But when it comes right down to it, it's kind of like me early in my career when I switched jobs and I realized I don't resonate with this organization. I don't really know what it is exactly, but it was uncomfortable and um, but it was not specific, right? It was
Mm.
not explicit what exactly was going on. And so what I realized was that as we look at this intrinsic motivation, that we we don't just come with it, right? It's just not like automatic. And it's much more than just kind of a business view of it. It's a very personal thing. Like you said, it comes from inside. And so as I studied it, I found out the two things. One was that intrinsic motivation can be developed. We can actually, there are specific skills and principles that anybody can, and I don't care who you are, what your background is, your race, your income, your education level, any other kind of external measure or definition, anybody can pursue intrinsic motivation.
Hmm.
And the benefits are off the charts. I mean, absolutely off the charts. And yet, it's not taught in school. It's not taught in most of our homes. And it's not taught in business because the kind of motivation that they have is primarily this external
Hmm.
motivation, which can be very powerful.
Hmm.
But it tends to lead to dysfunction in the other domains of our life, right?
Mm.
It can be super motivating to get a certain specific goal done, but it can be super destructive to the environment, to your spirituality, to your health, to your family life, to all these other important domains of your life. And so it's imbalanced. It's by nature, it is imbalanced. And so the antidote, if you will, the response we should have to that is to have super strong and explicit sources of internal motivation so that you can be mindful, specific, and intentional about what's going on and then steps you can take to do something about it. Um, and so here's a tidbit, and I don't know if this is revelatory or exciting or interesting, but I was pleased with myself. There's three generic ways we can respond, and I say respond specifically versus react, right? So
Hmm.
when I say react versus respond, what comes to you kind of the front of your mind?
When I think about the words react versus respond, react is more of just like it's kind of like a fight or flight, kind of interaction to whatever circumstance just happened. Like it's something that you don't think about, something that just happens naturally. Like if you hear a big bang or something, a reaction would be to like jerk and then look in that direction of wherever that came from to instantly see what is that? Is that some sort of danger? Is that some sort of loud noise? Versus a response is something that can be trained, it's something that can be honed. So when someone tells you something, let's say someone tells you something that you don't really like, a reaction would be you get upset and you start telling the person off. But rather a response could be something like, what is this person trying to tell me? Are they having a bad day? Is this person is trying to get under my skin? What are they trying to say something? Maybe it's just not coming off how they want it to come off, and then responding in a different form of something that's calm and something that's more thought out. So that would be my take on react versus respond.
Thank you. And that's a great response again. You'd think we'd practice this, but we didn't, I promise. But for people that are thinking, like, and I can tell you're like a thinking person, which is good for you. If we're a thinking person, this seems kind of natural, I think. In medicine, since I've worked in that healthcare a lot, if I give you a new prescription and you have a reaction to it, generally we don't think of that as a positive thing, right? I got a rash instead of, my pink eye getting better. Versus responding, right? When you respond to a medicine, then your pink eye gets better. You've responded the way that you expected it to work, and it's good. It's a positive thing. And it's just like you said as well, when we react, we're working out of the amygdala instead of the prefrontal cortex. And so we want to develop a habit, if you will, of responding to things and getting out of the habit of reacting to things. I'll give you an extreme example. When I was even younger, just out of high school, my first job was in a warehouse. And we picked stock, plastic pipe fittings for like irrigation and stuff like that, commercial kind of level stuff. And I worked with an older guy, which, I was 18. It's hard not to be older. And he worked in the warehouse for several years, and it was all good. Till one day he got into an argument with our boss. There was really just one boss and, a handful of warehouse workers. And they got into a really heated argument, and he punched the boss in the face.
Oh,
I know. Okay. So he didn't respond to whatever feedback he was getting from the boss. He reacted, and of course, he got fired on the spot. And I remember, at that young age, thinking that I was kind of used to, flying off the handle like that. I thought, lesson learned, right? Don't punch the boss.
Yep, that's definitely a good lesson to learn.
It's a good lesson to learn. Anyway, so we want to be responding and we want to be reacting less, which kind of flies counter to this modern trend that says, I want my emotions to rule the day. Well, you want your emotions because they're wonderful, they're powerful, they're actually a source of motivation. But you don't want them to rule the day.
True, very true.
You want to manage your emotions, right? You want to work with your emotions, but you don't want them to rule you, because that leads to horrible, that's a sitcom, right? Sitcoms are full of, when emotions rule the day and, they do silly things. But anyways, so there are 10 underlying principles to intrinsic motivation that I identified. I don't know that there aren't more, but I felt like these 10 were the foundations. And so in my book, which I'm writing, or I wrote specifically for people earning less than median incomes. As a general category, this group of people, they have to live their lives much smarter than somebody who's a more affluent, peer.
Right.
Because frankly, when you make, say, $150,000 a year, there are a lot of people that want to help you. And you have money to be able to pay them to help you. And it's just the way it is. I'm not saying it's fair. It's just the way that it is. And so if we make less money, like I have the last couple of years, having started a business and having it failed, and then, writing a book, and you're a new author trying to sell copies of your book, you're not making any money. And so, I kind of have to do everything myself because
Mm-hmm.
I don't have the resources to pay people to, pay to help me with my retirement, or to pay me with how to do a YouTube video, or to pay them whatever. And so if this resonates at all with any of your listeners, you've got to get more done with less resources, but you still have to save for retirement. I mean, if you want to not just work until the day you die, then you've got to do that. And, you've got to plan for the future, and you've got to do all the things that normal people have to do in everyday life. We just have to do more of it ourselves. So there's more stress, there's more pressure. And
Mm.
frankly, if we mess up, the consequences are greater. Anyways, and so I wrote the book in kind of with this kind of reality in mind. Because frankly, this has been the people that I've served over my life, this has been the more typical situation. And I wanted to provide something that was going to be actionable and helpful, and help them just to be more effective, right? To be more
Mm-hmm.
competent, to be more connected, because we have to be connected, and to be more balanced. And if I could help people to do that through the book, only as a guide, I don't really tell you what to do, or I just give you some guides so that you can use that wonderful, amazing, constantly growing, evolving, and adapting brain of yours to be a little better, smarter, and be more successful. For me, I love Earl Nightingale was a radio personality,
Mm-hmm.
50s, 60s, 70s, very popular, I think even into the 80s. And he's passed on now, but very thoughtful man. And he defines success, and I've adopted it, as the making progress towards a worthy goal or ideal.
Hmm.
I really love that definition. Um, and I'll give you kind of a practical takeaway. In my book, when we talk about goals, is one of the 10 principles is to make plans, have some goals.
Hmm.
Um, and then we want to accomplish the goals. That's another principle. I think those are principles 5 and 6 in the book. And so what you have to plan, but then you have to try to make what you planned a reality. There's kind of two sets of skills that are distinct there. And in the doing, my chapter called Doing, I talk about, I set a goal, and far too often we set a goal for the wrong reasons. But, if it provides some motivation, it's okay for now. So I set a goal to lose 20 pounds by my anniversary,
Mm.
because I
Okay.
want to fit into a suit, or if you're a woman, into a dress or whatever, right? And so we have some motivation. We have a time frame. We think about SMART goals, and you've talked about SMART goals on your program. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, so we set a SMART goal. We set this by then, and so we get there, and life happens, because life always happens, right? Life is what happens in between all the plans that you've made, right? So,
Very true.
um,
Yes.
um, and you lost 10 pounds, right? So
Yeah.
are you a failure?
Well, I would say no, because I mean, in terms of your goal, whatever your goal was, say you didn't reach it. Yes, you might not have reached that, but you did make positive progress towards what you were trying to get towards. So, all in all, I
Exactly.
wouldn't see that as a failure. I would see that as you're definitely making good progress towards what it is that you actually want. So,
Exactly.
that wouldn't be a failure.
So some perspective I would offer, especially for these kinds of goals. One is that there was not, if we think God is the master of the universe and he knows the beginning from the end, he didn't say lose 20 pounds by this day, right? This didn't come from God. So we don't have to have that kind of stress or pressure on us. So it's just something you decided because you happen to have gotten married in September, right? That you would have some kind of a goal so that you could fit a certain size of dress or a certain size of pants, right? By this really made up date.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that you didn't achieve it fully, don't beat yourself up about it, because that science tells us that when we beat ourselves up, which is chapter 8, by the way, that it actually makes us less capable.
Hmm.
This negative self-talk that we engage in actually makes us less effective.
It's like a self-sabotage.
It is self-sabotage, exactly. And there's a whole, raft of psychological processes that happen, which is probably much less important. We just can know and understand that when you engage in that kind of negative self-talk, on it, I'm so lazy, I'm so stupid, I'm so fat, I'm so, whatever the kind of words you use are, um, they are dysfunctional, and they actually make you less capable of accomplishing the thing that you're beating yourself up about. And so,
Mm-hmm.
one of the principles, one of the tools I suggest is that if you made any progress and you learned from what you did, then you are successful by definition. And you know what?
Mm.
You are the captain of your life. You're in charge of your life. You get to decide how you want to define success. And so if you share my definition and Earl Nightingale's, then, I made progress and I learned, even though I didn't fully reach the goal. And so then if I want to continue on for perhaps better reasons, for example, I'm motivated to lose a little bit of weight because I don't think this is a healthy long-term weight for me. I don't think I can do the things that I want to do and enjoy. And I'm certainly not on a trend line where I'm going to continue to be able to do that. So I want to manage my weight within a range for reasons that are tied to my values as
Mm.
opposed to my fears. Fears are always backwards looking. Your values keep you forward looking. And that's where we want to be. We want to be actionable today, looking forward consistently with our values. And if we can do that more than we have in the past, we will find ourselves on a positive spiral of feeling more and more capable, more and more connected, and remaining balanced in the process so that it's sustainable.
Wow. That is definitely I do like that a lot. Yeah, the whole fears versus values thing, that is very good. I did once hear that fear, someone did make an analogy, or rather used fear as an acronym, and said that fear is just false evidence appearing real. What do you think about that acronym?
False evidence of what?
False evidence appearing real. That's what
Oh,
someone said that fear stood for.
there you go. Well, I think that's an interesting concept. False evidence appearing real.
Yeah, their
I
background.
think, go ahead.
Yeah, so I was saying like just for a little context, their background for was saying that a lot of times the fears that we have, they kind of originate in our head, of course, but it's a lot of times it originates from negative self-talk. And then sometimes, let's say like public speaking, for example, you could be fearful of that, and then a whole bunch of your fears could be, oh, what if I trip on stage? What if I mess up? What if I stutter? What if people laugh at me? What if people aren't interested? And a lot of those are like self-created. And then,
Yeah,
but the thing is that when they said the false evidence, like, how do you know that's going to happen? You don't know that's going to happen. But because you're in that negative self-talk mindset, it comes to a point where it's like it looks like it's going to be real, but it's not actually, because you haven't proven that it's going to be real. And you're essentially psyching yourself out, thinking, hey, this can happen, when you have no idea if it'll happen. You have no idea if this talk is going, the talk that you're about to give with the public speaking example, is going to impact like half the crowd's lives. You have no idea. But because of you saying to yourself, what if I trip? What if I stutter? What if I this? What if I that? You're essentially self-sabotaging yourself and not giving people the best thing that you can.
there
So
you
I was
go.
wondering what you thought about that acronym of fear, of false evidence appearing real.
I like that. That's actually very insightful. I like it. I I think of the idea of, again, fear is looking backwards. And the disadvantage of looking backwards is that it's happened and you can't change it. And looking forward, however, you have opportunity for creativity and for growth.
Mm.
And those things will, in fact, make you more successful. And so I think it's a very interesting idea. And we just, in general, we don't want to look backwards except for what we can learn from it. And let's say that you had in your example of public speaking in the past, and it might have been in elementary school when you gave up and gave a verbal report, right? And
Yeah.
how tragic, if that's our worldview that we hold ourselves within, was what we were like in the sixth grade. Um, but oftentimes that's what we do. And so we have fears based upon things that happened a long time ago. And again, the focus on that shuts down creativity.
Mm.
It reduces self-esteem, and it is based on things that we can no longer change, right? And
Right.
so the wiser course is to say, yeah, I did that in sixth grade. So what do I know today that would help me have a better outcome than I did when I was, 12 years old? And that kind of a mindset, which is forward looking and creative and building, is going to allow you to have a better job, do a better job, and be more successful. And it may not
Hmm.
be perfect still, right? I mean, heaven forbid, I don't know any perfect people. So,
Yeah, neither
the
do
more
I.
you try, yeah, the more you try, the more you learn, then, the better you get. And it's a process. I think that's another important thing about being mortal and fallible, is to realize that life is a process. And the
Mm.
fact that we tried something and didn't do as well as we'd hoped is not a failure per se, but a learning experience that helps us build and do better the next time. And we might not ever and likely won't be perfect, but that's okay as long as we're constantly learning and growing and improving. And that's the beauty of life.
Hmm. Absolutely true. And I did have one question about your book as well, because I know this was when I was telling some people like, hey, we're gonna have this guy on the show, and there's like, oh, can you ask him this one question? I was like, okay, sure, I can ask him one question for you. So the question that they had for you was they heard the title of the book, they were intrigued in it, and so they wanted to know how long would it take to create this new you? Like, how much work will it take, and like, is this process for the faint of heart? I know it's not really a question that can be answered like set in stone, but if you can give it give it your best shot, I guess.
So I think there's two aspects to this I'd look at. And so in chapter 5 and 6 of the book, we talk about planning and doing. And in the and what I try to do in the book is introduce people to enough foundational ideas that they could draw from it, something that applies to them specifically, that they can apply in their life. Um, and again, I don't want to tell you which element, in each chapter, because it's going to
Mm.
different for every person. So I don't want to try to look prescient or something and predict that, because that would be foolish. Um, and so I try to give enough kind of substance, if you will, that as you go through the process, I recommend, and you're thinking about it, that you go, oh, this would be super helpful for me, and I'll want to apply it. Right. And so there's two aspects to that. I talk about outcome goals and process goals. Are you familiar? Have you heard of that kind of distinction between goals?
That one I've not heard of. I've probably heard of the concept, but I don't think I've ever heard it worded that way.
Okay. So the idea is we have generally two kinds of goals. The first kind of goal is an outcome goal. It's a get something done. It's the typical SMART goal kind of a thing. I want to do
Okay.
this by this date, to this degree, and it's realistic. It's time based. You go follow the SMART process, and so those are outcome goals. 99% of what we do in life and in business is SMART goals, it's outcome goals. However, we look at society today. What is the outcome of that emphasis, that imbalanced, if you will, emphasis on outcome goals? Is that epidemic today are things like depression, burnout, breakdown, failure. I mean, these are epidemic.
Mm-hmm.
And why is that? It's because we're out of balance. And so I highly recommend that we look at some process goals. And there's a couple of key differences. One, an outcome goal might be something I don't like to do, but I do it because of, some motivation I have to achieve this certain thing. Process goals tend to be things that you enjoy doing. And they tend to be things that help you become something more than you were before. And so a lot of what we get, and most of what we get, frankly, in books and the internet, on YouTube and whatnot, is process-oriented stuff. It's how do I do this, right? How do I find the best podcasting equipment? How do I blah, 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 right? That's what most of the
Mm-hmm.
stuff is. But life, a long term, if we think about our life over a long term, most of our success in life, most of our progress in life that is sustainable, that won't lead to burnout, won't lead to discouragement, won't lead to depression, won't lead to imbalance, won't lead to great success in this part of life and horrible failure in this part of my life, right? But it's more balanced and it kind of grows in sync, is based on who we become. And that requires process goals. I want to be kinder. I want to be more kind. I want to be a better husband. I want to become somebody who would be promoted at work, right? I highly recommend if you want to be promoted, you want to be a supervisor, or you want to be an entrepreneur, and in whatever your field is that you're interested in, that you think about not so much I want to double my business in a year or something like that. I recommend you look at a more profound introspective level. What would I look like? What would I need to become in order to achieve that kind of external success or that kind of internal growth? And by doing that, I like natural metaphors. So, if you heard the thing that says the fish is the last to discover water.
Okay, no, I haven't heard that one before, but that's
There you
pretty
go.
interesting one.
Because it's everywhere, right? You don't even think about being in the water. But until they fly out and land on the beach and they can't breathe, they realize, wait a minute, there isn't just like water everywhere. I've never really thought about this before, right? And they try to flop back into the water and then it's all over. But now they have some recognition of the milieu, if you will, that they live in that influences every single thing that they do. And this is how we are. We live in an industrial age. And if it was not 2022, but it was 1822, this would be a new revolutionary idea. Machines get stuff done. We drive machines. I mean, most of the metaphors that we use are based on this mechanical kind of industrial mental model. I see this, you see it in job descriptions. You need to drive success, drive change. We're going to power through this. We're just going to apply resources. So, personal pet peeve: people are not assets. If you have business people listening to you, I promise you, it is dysfunctional to look at people as assets. But we treat them like assets. But people are human beings. People are the sole source of value added in your organization. I guarantee it. I don't care how cool your technology is, how cutting edge, how modern, blah, 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 because you know what? In 2 years, your technology will not be. Somebody will have surpassed it, right? I mean, it's just the nature of things. It's the nature of technology. When I was 1992, I worked at a heart institute. We had digital cath labs, like one of 10 in the country. It was leading edge, amazing, cool technology. Had these huge discs that we recorded things onto. And of course, 5 years later, it was, we could have donated it to Armenia or something because it wasn't cool. It wasn't high tech. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't leading edge. But the thing that added value in our organization was our people. It always was, and it always will be. So people are not assets. And if we don't stop looking at them as assets, we'll continue to make the destructive decisions we do about how we engage with our people, how we treat our people, how we manage our people versus how we lead and develop our people so that they can continue to add more and more value in a sustainable way. So I'm going to use a natural metaphor. I think of a cherry tree. I told you I worked in a rural area. We had lots of cherry trees. It was beautiful. I love cherries. And so if you think about a cherry tree in the kind of mechanical metaphor, what you want to do is minimize roots because they take a lot of time to develop. And you want to minimize trunk because that's not value adding, right? Trunk is a wasted space. I want as big of a top of a tree with as many cherries as possible. That's the model that we go into business with a mechanical metaphor with. The problem is in real life, in the real world, in nature that we all live in, interact with, and are inseparable from, when you do that, what happens during a rainstorm? What happens during a windstorm?
Got no trunk.
What happens during a drought? What happens during any of the inevitable things that happen in life? And you may have a couple, 3 years where, man, this is the best decision we ever made. But inevitably, then one of those kinds of exigencies, one of those kinds of stresses happens, and the tree will fail, die, blow over. It's going to fail somehow. And that's what happens when we look at people as assets, as machines. I'm going to push that machine to the limit to just before breaking. And if you do that long enough, of course, it will eventually break. And you can send a mechanic in and fix it, but people, it's much harder.
Yeah.
Because by then, your marriage has failed and you're miserable and you're depressed and you feel like you're a failure and blah, 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 and all these things going on. We're so much more complicated. And so what my book tries to do, starting with the first chapter, and they build, is values, and that's the first chapter, is to build a foundation of roots and trunk that naturally, normally, without even having to think about it, produce the maximum amount of fruit, if you will, those outcomes that we can, given the size of the trunk and the roots. And if we want to grow more, have more outcomes, then what we have to do is grow the roots and the trunk. And we do that through light and fertilizer and good pruning, good management, good leadership. That's what builds those capacities. And the stronger and the more robust they get, two things happen. We consistently produce more. And during the inevitable droughts and rainstorms and all that kind of stuff of life, we're standing still when it's done. And we may not produce as much for a season, but you know what? That's normal. That's natural. That's okay. It's going to happen no matter what we do. And so we can be as strong and robust. And then when the better season happens, we're in a so much better position to capitalize on it. Because not 10% of our trees blew over and were ruined, and then you got to plant seedlings again and start all over again, right? That's the mechanical metaphor. Well, we'll just hire, we lost these people, so we'll hire some new ones and bring them on. They're little seedlings, and they have to start growing, right? But it takes time to produce, and it's costly and all that stuff, when we could have been producing all along. And so in the long run, we actually produce more, and we do it more consistently, and we don't have the destruction involved in that imbalance. And so that's what I recommend for us as individuals, is to build our foundations as strong as possible. And inevitably, we're going to achieve more of our goals in a way that's balanced and sustainable.
Absolutely love it. Absolutely fantastic. And I know we're finally getting to a closing point here. But before I let you go and before we say goodbye to our wonderful guest here, can you please give us one more thing, a call to action? What would you like people to do? Where do you want people to go? We have a website. I know you're definitely promoting your book, so definitely if you want to put that in there as well. What would you like people to do after listening to this episode?
So, and I feel badly almost because I get it kind of obviously, I guess I get kind of engaged in this and I get excited about it and I feel like it's really important. But um, I think the first thing, and it's the first chapter of the book, is to make your own personal values explicit.
Mm.
That is the foundation to everything else good that you want to happen in your life. I don't care what it is, personal, spiritual, professional, hobby, I don't care what it is, all domains of your life, if you can, and I have a specific definition of making it explicit. One is, you know what your top 5 core values are. It's so hard when you do this. It's harder than you think about it, than you think it might be, but identify your core top values, 5 of them, 5, and rank order them, and then ask yourself 3 questions. What does this mean? So what does that value mean to me? What does it look like in practice in my life? And why would I be better off if I lived that value fully? So that to me is a process of making your values explicit. If you will do that, that's the very first foundation to all the other good things you want to do, whether it be outcome based or process based, so doing or becoming. It avoids apathy, avoids languishing. I kind of wrote some notes here. It avoids
Mhm.
fuzzy thinking. It avoids regret. It encourages meaning in life, well-being, clarity, and focus. I think that's the first thing that all of us could do. We started to build those strong roots, and we're on that path that we all want to be on.
Absolutely, absolutely love it. Love it. That's absolutely fantastic. Absolutely. I definitely wrote that down. Definitely gonna be putting that in this episode's description. So thank you very much. You have any last closing remarks that you want to give before we say our farewells here?
No, thank you, Rashawn. It's been a pleasure. I appreciate being on. I'm grateful. Um, and to all of your audience members, remember your life is important. I don't care how common, how challenged, wherever you're starting from, wherever you are today, your life matters and it is important. And if we all can go with that foundation and grow from there, I think then the world will be a better place.
Mhm. Absolutely, 100% agree. So, guys, that is where we're going to end this week's episode. I want you all to give a warm, warm congratulations and thank you to David Edwards. I know you can't hear them, but they're all clapping. Woo, there you go. They're all clapping for you. So, thank you very much, David, for coming on the show. Thank you for talking to us and talking to the audience. And I know they got some value from this episode. And to everybody out there listening, thank you all so much. And I will catch you all in the next episode. See you all later.